Romulans, humans, Borg, even Klingon Tards want a piece of you in Star Trek Away Team. But with so many species wanting to kill you, is there actually a good game behind it all? Well, it turns out the answer is complicated. Welcome, my name's Azash and welcome to another PC game retrospective video. Generally speaking, most Star Trek games have followed the adventures of one of the existing television series cast. The early point-and-click games were based on the original series. There were several movie tie-in games based on the Next Generation cast. Deep Space Nine saw its fair share of both adventure and point-and-click games, and of course Voyager saw the excellent Elite Force series. The point is, while Star Trek is a franchise limited only by someone's imagination, when you anchor a game with a familiar cast, often with excellent voice acting by the original actors, you bring a level of comfort around expectations for players. Just look at a game like Star Trek Generations. When it released, it was technically well behind the times, and its gameplay, while having some bright moments, was largely a fairly flat affair. However, by using the characters and settings from the 7th film, the game instantly gained more appeal. Now, while Away Team does feature some cameo appearances from some of the Next Generation cast, including Brent Spiner and Michael Dorn, its setting aboard the USS Incursion under the command of Captain Rufelian is largely completely independent from other forms of Star Trek media. While this presents a risk by having that lack of familiarity, it also presents an opportunity for creativity, one that developer reflexive entertainment often takes, perhaps even sometimes too far. More on this later. The other thing which stands out in the case of Away Team is the genre. Now, there are almost 100 Star Trek games for PC and consoles. However, there's only one real-time tactics squad game, and that's Away Team. Now, it's certainly far from the only real-time tactics game available, with standout series such as XCOM and Commandos, but it's certainly the only Star Trek one. Like many other Trek titles during the period, Away Team only released for PC. There was both a single-player and multiplayer component, and while I'm only going to be focusing on the single-player element here, I do want to mention that it is still possible to play the multiplayer using a LAN connection. The version we are playing today is the GOG version, which apart from some minor tweaks for compatibility on modern PCs, is the same as the original experience. There's very little in the way of mods and patches for Away Team, meaning no widescreen support, although there is a German language patch for those German-speaking fans. As far as the story and setting go, the game casts the player as in command of the USS Incursion, an experimental stealth ship which is able to change its appearance to that of other ships. The Incursion is manned by a covert team of specialists, each trained in a variety of different disciplines. For example, some are experts in computer systems, whereas others are experts in explosives. The Incursion, along with its specialists, are deployed in secret to, as the official description puts it, eliminate problems Starfleet can't officially touch. In terms of the actual plot, the game sees the Incursion deployed to a Klingon base to investigate what looks like a simple raid by Romulans. Only as the player quickly finds out, this is no ordinary Klingon base, and these are no ordinary Romulans. There's definitely some inspiration taken from the Season 1 episode Conspiracy of Star Trek The Next Generation. However, to the game's credit, it is an original story and one that is remarkably well told, thanks in part to some great storytelling and competent voice acting. There's a section fairly early on in the game where you receive a briefing on an upcoming mission and click to proceed to the Away Team selection screen. Only it doesn't take you to this selection screen, it cuts directly to the action as during the briefing a new threat has emerged. This is a really small detail, but it has a really large impact in the game's overall immersion and pacing. While I really enjoyed the story and found it not only well told, but probably one of the best Star Trek video game stories, the game does take some liberties with the setting which may not be to everyone's taste. The fact that Starfleet has a stealth ship going around with a mission of eliminating problems, complete with sniper rifle-wielding security officers and forced mind-melding Vulcans on board, probably isn't in line with the Federation Charter. Alas, I chose to enjoy it for what it was, and not think too much about the overall continuity. Before we continue, a massive thank you to everyone who supports the channel. If you enjoy this content, please do consider subscribing. It helps support the channel, and you can be notified of new content the moment it drops. With that out of the way, let's head to the USS Incursion, prepare our landing party, and head back to 2001 to remember Star Trek Away Team. Away Team is a game with a surprising amount of gameplay depth to it, while at the same time suffering around some of its core systems and mechanics. What the game does do very well, though, is give the player a very good sense of control of the adventure. At the beginning of each mission, the player gets to choose which members of the away team they will take along, with the decisions here playing a very big part in exactly how the mission will play out. For example, if you prioritize crew with stealth, then you're going to be better equipped to complete the mission quietly and without any casualties. Whereas if you prioritize crew with stamina, you're going to be better equipped to go in all guns blazing. But it's not just the player's stats which determine the cadence of a mission, as each crew member also has a selection of equipment that they will be able to use. Some of these items are often required to complete a mission and will necessitate taking at least one or two specific crew members. However, there is generally still a choice here. For example, if you need someone with a computer system hacker, you have a choice between a few crew, each with different master stats. The briefing also provides a recommended item list, which, to be honest, after paying attention to in the early game, I kind of just went in my own direction to support my own playstyle later in the game and didn't really have any issues. It's probably a fair guide, though, for how the game thinks the ideal way to complete a mission is, but to the game's credit, it does afford the player the choice to complete missions however they choose to, so long as the primary mission objectives are met. Now, there are also secondary mission objectives, and these are actually quite important, as completing these unlock new abilities for the team's equipment. For example, a healing hyperspray might be upgraded to heal more health per use, or a weapon's range might be upgraded. As I mentioned before, the briefings are all really well done, and I never felt like I didn't understand the mission or any of the objectives. The last Trek game I reviewed was Hidden Evil, and that game's briefings were nothing more than a static display with a few lines of spoken dialogue, so this was certainly a welcome change. Although, is it just me, or does one of the antagonists look like a slightly younger version of your commanding officer? Either way, the setup for the missions is really solid, and certainly gives the game a strong foundation to build upon. Unfortunately, this strong foundation can't carry the weight of some of the inconsistencies and poor execution the game suffers from. In a strange twist, a lot of the game's issues don't become evident right away. This is largely due to the initial level design and objectives. They are constructed in a way that supports the gameplay mechanics well. However, as the challenge ramps up, so does the complexity in level design and objectives, and this is where the problems start. The first mission's level geometry is largely one of wide passageways and no traversal between buildings. This works well for camera, control, and combat. Although just a few levels later, you find yourself aboard a starship with narrow corridors, room-to-room traversal, and additional security systems such as cameras. Now, you do gain access to new equipment to help navigate these areas, but there are inherently poor design choices within the core mechanics, which largely negate any special equipment or devices you can throw at it. Firstly, the camera. Now, in isolation, there isn't really anything wrong with it. It's isometric and scrolls wherever you move the mouse. But other design decisions, specifically in the art and layout of some of the areas, make it a chore to navigate some of the game's levels. The decision not to use any type of transparency means that sometimes the way forward isn't overly obvious, as some of the doors are either cast in shadows or at an angle which is not overly obvious. The camera certainly isn't the biggest problem the game has, but it is a somewhat mixed experience when relying on it. Another issue, arguably far more egregious, is the control and combat, which given the nature of the game are fairly tightly linked. I'm not clear if the main issue I had with control was a bug, intended design, or something in between, but at seemingly random points of the game, selecting all of the characters to move to a location would only move certain characters, and I'd have to go back and manually select the ones left behind to move them also. It wasn't game-breaking, but it certainly was frustrating. Although there was actually a silver lining to this at times, as when you command the squad to a particular position and select an attack, the crew will fire their weapons whether or not they have line of sight to the enemy or not, simply due to the way the game arranges the crew in a group. If you don't notice this line of sight up front, you can either get a crew member into a firefight where they are alone and will be killed quickly, or fail to stop an enemy in time before they can trigger an alarm, both very frustrating situations. When the game does force you to manually select different members of your squad, you can at least have a bit more control as to where exactly they move as a group. What I would have preferred though is that when you command an attack, the crew members that do not have line of sight move into a vantage point to gain line of sight. But the game does have other issues around control. For example, you can select an overlay which effectively lets you see an enemy's line of sight. Right, that sounds helpful. Only sometimes when you set a path for the squad avoiding this, they will inadvertently cross over into that line of sight and draw fire. The game's weapons are fairly varied for the source material and include everything from phasers to concussion grenades to even EMP grenades to take out security systems. There's no doubt that this part of the combat is a strength of the game, and the game even respects the Borg's ability to adapt to phaser frequencies after a few shots, meaning that you need to dig deep into your arsenal and creativity to successfully defeat them. Now, there are a lot of enemies you will encounter in the game, and the enemy AI ranges from poor to exceptional with absolutely no in between. Honestly, some enemies you can just take out with one shot, and others with one shot you. There really is no middle ground here. The problem with this is that it makes combat very inconsistent, and that's probably the best word I would use to describe the overall gameplay: inconsistent. There are a lot of good ideas here, and when the stars align and the mechanics and systems all work together, it's a really fun game. Unfortunately, throughout the 12-hour runtime, the gameplay too often asks the player to deal with a set of systems and mechanics which don't always work well together or with other parts of the gameplay experience. As far as presentation goes, Away Team has a very hand-drawn feeling to it. Now, no doubt there was some technology used to create everything at scale, but the level of detail and thoughtfulness put into the environment is evident from the first to last mission, with all of the environments the game portrays matching up with the look and feel of the television series. All of the UI elements, from the mission briefings to equipment selection, is also well done. While I have found similar games can often suffer from complexity in loadouts and equipment, Away Team doesn't fall into this category, with all of the UI having just the right amount of depth to support the gameplay without bogging the player down in confusion. There is a quick save system, and I'm kind of torn on this. Yes, it does reduce the challenge, as you can simply quick save and reload if you fail a mission objective without any real consequence. However, given some of the gameplay mechanics don't exactly work the best, without this system, I probably would have complained about being frustrated. I think if some of the gameplay issues were fixed, a checkpoint system would have presented a more nuanced challenge. However, objectively speaking, with the current state of the gameplay, the quick save is virtually required. Performance on a modern PC was fine, and everything ran exactly as I expected it to, thanks to the great modernization done by GOG. As far as the sound design goes, it's full marks here. While the game does feature some well-known real-life counterparts, such as Brent Spiner and Michael Dorn, they alone don't make the game. They certainly support it and are welcome additions as always. However, the voice acting from the other new cast members is really what shines here.
Ambassador Worf, I am Captain Marcus Raffelian. We need to get you back to the Klingon High Council to meet with Chancellor Martok. We must hurry. There are many forces aligned against us.
Time is limited. The situation is critical. We must fight together to destroy this threat. If we do not, both the Klingon Empire and the Federation will be doomed.
By the time the credits roll, you will feel like this is a crew that you know well, and that wouldn't be possible without the excellent voice acting. Effects and music turn in a likewise good performance, but as is often the case, it really is the voices of the characters who help bring the story, and by extension the game, to life. Generally, I get towards the end of a video and I share who I think will enjoy the game. In the case of some of the more questionable Trek games, I will often say it's one only for the die-hard fans of the source material, whereas games which captivate me from start to finish will often be recommended to anyone who is a fan of Trek. In the case of Away Team, after spending many hours with the game and many more creating this video, I'm still not 100% sure who to recommend this game to, and not necessarily in a bad way. When I recently reviewed Star Trek Hidden Evil, there were a lot of underlying mechanics which just didn't work very well and had to be endured in that state for the entirety of the adventure, because the underlying mechanics of these systems were just broken without any way to overcome them. But that's not really the case in Away Team. Yes, there are mechanics which don't work as you would expect, but in most cases, there are things the player can do to overcome these issues by changing their playstyle. Moving characters independently is a good example of this. Is it ideal? Definitely not. Ideally, these systems should work better out of the box. But can the problems be overcome and enjoyment still had? I think so. There is a very strong story here, and one that begs the player to play just one more level to find out what happens next. Whether or not you can make compromises on your playstyle to deal with some of the other issues, though, will be up to each individual player. For me, Away Team is an okay game. It's not something I would go out of my way to recommend, but at the same time, I certainly wouldn't dissuade someone from checking it out. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.